So I was invited to talk a bit about my journey, how this started, and in 2018, when Doug Ford canceled the Ontario pilot, I was near the tail end of in running my business. I was going to take a sabbatical, and I was so mad that he canceled it because I've been following basic income for a few years before that. I just had to do something, and uh, I began the work with UBI Works with Ken and Liam and others that we've been seeing in the chat channels, driven initially by a strong desire to correct for power imbalances, the kind that keep people in abusive homes or in abusive work situations. At the end of the day, if people have income security, then they have the ability to say no. And I had experience with that growing up in my own family. I think a basic income would have really shifted the relationships that drove a lot of difficult times. I also felt this almost soulful truth that the reason why we have poverty is that we should be somehow sharing in economic progress. We should be sharing in societal progress. But I didn't know what that looked like. And when I heard the term UBI, it sounded like, well, that sounds like the way to do it. If there was cash payments coming, even though if it's not intended, it's intended to alleviate poverty, those who've been most have been most displaced by our current system. Well, that's a good place to start. But I didn't exactly know what it would mean to share in economic progress. But basic income seemed like a necessary part of this solution. And as a technologist running a software developer education company, I was very concerned with automation. Like my father and uncle's jobs were automated away in the early 2000s in Ontario's automotive manufacturing sector, and they both had to take lower income work after that. And it just seemed to me that we need this. We need this now. We need this so that people have time to retrain, or they have time to seek better opportunities. They have the ability to say no in precarious or abusive situations. Ultimately, they have the ability to improve their own productivity. So we started UBI Works, and the purpose of the organization was to make basic income election ready, make it so that it could win in an election. Well, what do you need to win an election? You need to have enough people who will vote for it. So we need to make it obvious that there are enough people. So we've been focusing on petitions, list building, social media. We have 40,000 people on our email list. Such incredible activists are all of you who are here with us today, where anytime we ask the list to do anything, at least 1,000 people do it, sometimes multiple thousands of people to do it. Anytime Senator Pate makes any movement in the Senate on the bill, immediately, like all of her colleagues in the Senate will get like hundreds of emails each from their constituents saying, "Oh, please follow this, please work on this bill." So we are kind of the activist force in the country that can rally like thousands of people to push their government officials. We've generated over 800,000 emails to various levels of government in the last 7 years since we've started. I personally worked in UBI Works full-time for 5 years myself, and I've been part-time now, but the team continues. And Ken mentioned that I've been the primary donor, so I'm managing an endowment that is funding these operations out of the proceeds from my own business, and that will continue so that we can continue this work until it's done. Now, along the way, in that 7-year journey, I learned a lot about the economics that create poverty in the first place. And I mentioned earlier that I felt this instinct that we should be sharing in societal progress somehow, but not knowing how. And so when I came upon the writings of Professor Guy Standing, Carl Widerquist, Thomas Paine, like these are some of the most influential world figures on the basic income movement. They always talk about that the reason why we have poverty is because of our relationship to land, our relationship to economic rents being the unearned profits from resources like oil and minerals. In short, it seems like we're in some ways over socializing private income and we're under socializing public income. What does that mean? I mean, like gains in land value, oil and resource sector, like these things should be paying for our public needs. So if we were, intellectual property, like artificial intelligence is trained on public data, but all that profit is being privatized. If we had some system where we were taxing use of the commons of commonwealth, we probably wouldn't have any poverty. And the biggest culprit in the room is land. Like, why do we have poverty? It's because land is too expensive. I have a couple of rental units in downtown Toronto, and I was shocked to see that the asking rents on those units went up 50% from 2015. And like, what the heck, 50%? I mean, it's not like people's jobs incomes went up 50%. So what does that mean? Like, it's shifting people further out of the periphery. It's not the same kind of people that are applying to rent there anymore. This is crazy. Something's got to give. So while we continue with UBI Works to champion a guaranteed basic income because it is the quickest, most important way to alleviate the worst impacts of poverty, to keep people out of poverty, to help students and single parents and entrepreneurs and people trying to better themselves, to help low-income people to increase their productivity. We need to do that. But we also since started another organization called Commonwealth Canada, where we can explore these concepts of the commons, of land's relationship to housing and poverty. And Commonwealth Canada is primarily looking at land value tax because land is the most expensive item in everyone's pocketbook. It's the most expensive part of your mortgage, of your rent, and it is the sucking up way too much of the capital that could be going into to feeding more productivity in this country. It is sucking up wage growth, as you heard in my basic rent example earlier. Not only are we paying too much of our wages into rent, but it is also diverting too much of the excess capital that could be invested in businesses or in consumer spending or is being just going into mortgages, which is starving the country, frankly. So Commonwealth Canada is looking into the long-term solutions that can reduce the drivers of poverty while UBI Works is continuing to fight for directly reducing poverty through a guaranteed basic income. So we learned in this time period. It took me like 5 years to figure out what UBI really means. So now we like to say that a guaranteed basic income is for keeping people out of poverty today versus a universal basic income, or what we like to think of it as dividends, social dividends, Commonwealth dividends, is for sharing wealth. Sharing wealth we have a common claim to, because we don't have a common claim to other people's incomes, but we do have a common claim to things like mineral rights and oil profits and arguably even land value. And we'll hear more about that later in this call. So that's why we came to these two organizations, and that's where we are today. So we'll continue this work, and really grateful to have all of you here with us. And I guess since this is a year in town hall, I just want to share when I look back at all those years when we focused purely on basic income through UBI Works. I mentioned at the beginning that the purpose of the organization is to make basic income election ready. We really focused on building. I mentioned building constituencies, building activists, but also shifting the narrative. Shifting narrative to be election ready. We have to talk about basic income in centrist terms. So we focused on research that shows that it'll grow the economy, and now we can see many politicians saying it'll grow the economy by more than it costs, and that's because of the research that we funded and that you then distributed through petitions that emailed your MPs. Everyone knows that basic income will grow the economy by more than it costs. So, the day when basic income is being discussed as an economic necessity, the way the former Deputy Prime Minister, Christopher Freeland, said that $10 daycare is economic infrastructure, is the day that I think we can find the bipartisan consensus to really push it forward. So that's why we've been focusing on that. So like another example of such a narrative is that this will help low-income people increase their productivity. That sounds good in the papers, right? Who can argue with that? But it just shows that this is not about inspiring or furthering lack of activity. It's actually creating more activity, more pro-social activity, more economic activity, while keeping people out of poverty. So that's why we focus the way we do on these more centrist terms, because at the end of the day, this has to win in an election. So it has to be something that the middle class understands is actually good for them. And it is good for them, because we saw in Dauphin, Manitoba, that when we had a basic income, people at the lowest of incomes could negotiate better pay. And that trickled up and raising incomes even at the median who weren't getting a basic income, because better pay at the lowest levels increases pay at all levels eventually as the job market catches up. So yeah, that's where we're at. Thank you very much.